the EAHC podcast. As always, it's me, Josh. This is episode number 26, I believe, if I've worked these out correctly. If not, it's episode 25 and I'm an idiot. Today we're joined by a very special guest and also a new guest onto the podcast. He's well known for... He's got a lot of accolades. The best one is probably not sleeping in his own hotel room. It's Mr. Alastair King. Hello, Ali. How you doing?
All right, good. You?
Yeah, very well, mate. Thank you. Very well. Probably done you a bit of a disservice there, but I know a lot of people know you for that. So I got Ali on because he is currently championing and doing very well with a few dwarf lists, and it's a little bit of a certainly in our local meta. There's a couple of players that play all variants of dwarfs, but not so popular at the moment. So I wanted to get Ali on because he's a bit more knowledgeable, or he's a lot more knowledgeable than I am about them. And hopefully, I've got a few good questions, pick his brain. Some of you more competitive GBHL people who end up listening to this, Ali, just tell them all lies, mate. It's fine. Right, so let's just start by talking a little bit about your background of probably Lord of the Rings strategy battle game up to this point we're at now with Middle-earth strategy battle game, and then your affiliation with the GBHL and how long you've been playing in that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So, when did you start playing?
Right, so it would have been, I think I was 9-ish back in sort of when the Two Towers box set came out. So, guessing about 2002-ish. Me and my brother Matt basically got into it. We didn't know the rules properly. I used to think that the 3+ shoot value meant that you only needed to roll a 3+ to kill a model. So we had great fun, although I wouldn't say it was the most realistic competitive example, but that's when I sort of started getting into it.
You'd have been quite young at that point?
Yeah. So, I wasn't old enough at the time to go play in the GW store because you had to be 12 at the time.
Oh, well, there you go. I think we'll let you off, mate. I think we'll let you off.
And then, so got into that originally, and then sort of eventually was old enough to go play in the store. And there was quite a few. This was back when SPG was at its original height, so there's quite a few players and all that. Yeah. And I remember it was around about this point I first started collecting dwarves.
Right. So that would have been old school dwarfs, so Barlin.
Yes.
During.
So yeah, basically it was when you could only get metal dwarves. So it was Barlin, and Barlin's Guard was the box set to get the Khazad Guard.
That was a lovely box art. I loved that box art.
Yeah, that was cool. I think I got about 2 or 3 of the boxes. And then Metal Dwarf Warriors, which I still think are really, really good, actually. A lot of the metal models hold up, in my opinion. So,
yeah, I agree.
So I did that for a couple of years, and then sort of it kind of died down a little bit, the SPG scene, and then I ended up dropped out of the hobby a little bit, sort of, and then I got back into the hobby, but I was doing Warhammer Fantasy with a lot of my mates who finally got into it around about college age. One of which is Dave Farm, who's also another member of the community.
He is, yep.
And then, so we played that, went to uni. For those of you not in the know, they kind of changed Warhammer Fantasy quite dramatically around about then. The Hobbit films came out. While I was at uni, I sort of was like, what hobby stuff can I bring with me? SPG, you only really need one small case. And then I sort of went to my first GBHL event randomly, and then I fell back in love with the game, and then the rest from there is GBHL history, basically.
Right, okay. So, the first time I think I had played you at a GBHL event was 2015 maybe, and it was at my first Desolation of Stockport event. and you absolutely battered me with a list you were quite popular, quite famous for at the time, with your Radagast on Eagle and some Eagles. And anyway, yep, moving on. So that was.
Yeah,
That was
I remember killing Boromir and family in one heroic combat.
Yep, still hurts. And we've played again at a Stockport event as well. I think I had my horrible Goblin Town list, and you beat me with your fiefdoms list again, quite spectacularly. So my run-ins with you have gone very well for you, not so well for me. But they're always good games, and they're played in good spirits. So, aside from Radagast and fiefdoms, obviously now you're more well known for all things Durin's folk, so to speak. I remember watching a Twitch game last year of you at the GT. I think it was last year, wasn't it? Against Mr. Nolan.
Yeah.
It was a really good game, actually. I watched the whole thing. I normally sort of skip through the Twitch games when I watch them back. I don't watch them live. They take too long. It's far too long. But I'll sort of wait till they finish, and then they upload them on their channel, and then I'll normally skip through. But I actually watched all of that game because I thought tactically you played it so well. And it's no discredit to Dave, because I think Dave's a good player also. But I think the way you played it, and then the Grimhammer killing Gullivar was amazing. If you don't know, I think Gullivar had one wound left. Dave forgot to charge a Grimhammer, or he wasn't able to charge a Grimhammer for whatever reason.
I had priority, and then he just decided not to call a heroic move.
Right.
Even he had lots of sort of might in the area, so he could have easily, but decided not to, and then regretted it.
Well, yeah, ran into him, hit, wounded, and then a Grimhammer killed Gullivar, which is amazing. But more recently, it's been a different flavour of dwarfs. I wanted to get your few good questions, actually. Maybe that will help, because I've criminally unprepared, which is my own fault. But if I look at some of the questions without directly asking you straight off the bat, well, let's go with army building. People always want to know about army building, and the hierarchy of that is one of the questions. I'm going to go straight because it links into army building. Yeah. Is there a hierarchy to your heroes that you choose to take?
Yes.
And then how do you go about picking those? That hierarchy at certain points? Is there like I don't know what, haven't been to a GBHL event for a while. I don't know what the norm is now. Is it sort of still between 500 and 700, or is it now a bit higher because of the prevalence of big heroes?
I'd say 500 to 800 probably. There's quite a few 750s and 800s, but yeah, sort of the lowest one would be 450, which is into the west, and then I would say you usually go up to 800 points highest, although there was 1250 point that World Champion ran in Ripon, which was quite a different sort of points level to play at.
Did you play at that?
Yeah, I actually won that one.
Oh, well, there you go.
With children's folk.
So maybe we could go through a sort of a 5 to up to that sort of level. Yeah. Would you take the dwarves at 5, or is it too low?
I have taken the dwarves at 5. I've done all right with them. I would say that depending, they can be weaker, but that's more. The army itself isn't weaker. It's just they can struggle more with scenarios.
Is that because of lack of numbers, or do you just not have the heroes to?
It's because you can't quite get the numbers to help overcome the movement difficulties they often have. Right.
Okay. So you won't do a 500 point list then, because it's probably. Let's go for, if you said it's more popular at the moment, 750. What would a 750 point list look like?
Cool. So, are we do you want to go for German folk or Army of Thor?
Whichever you prefer. Both. I mean, people are here for pick your brain, sort of, fountain of knowledge.
So I'll start with Army of Thor.
Okay, mate.
So there's the general hierarchy of heroes with them. Actually, it's quite clear. So you have to take Thor first.
You do,
because
yeah.
he unlocks the strength 4 Grimhammers. And then the next thing is you need a dwarf captain, in my opinion,
For
because you
March?
need heroic march. Dwarf armies being slow and no cavalry, Iron Hills being an exception. You really need the march just to sort of help get you around the board or bail you out and seize the prize or similar.
Okay.
So you go for 4, he gets the army bonus and the strength 4, then the captain.
Okay.
Then depending on the points level, I would usually go Frayne.
Okay.
Because Frayne is an amazing beat stick and he's the most reliable killy hero in that list.
Right.
He also gives a board-wide standfast, which is handy. And then at those points, so they're the only 3 heroes I would go for on that list, and then you just max out on the dwarfs and the warbands. So I'm trying to think. So
do you get a full warband of the strength 4 Grimhammers, or do you not get do you take the whole 18, or?
Usually I go 50-50 dwarf warriors of spears and shield and Grimhammers. Up until you sort of max out the Grimhammers, and then it's just more dwarves, spears, and shield.
Okay.
I haven't got the list written out, but
sure.
I think it's something in the region of about 40 dwarf models, including the heroes.
Nice. That's a lot of dwarfs.
Yeah. I would then also go for a Warhorn and Banner in there. Usually, if Banner, because it means you can have a little subset of dwarfs run off and be outside of the effect of for 6-inch Banner, his armor bonus. And then it also scores you points in objectives, which is handy. And then the Warhorn is really useful in the current sort of scene, I think, where there's a lot of terror and harboring of evil and stuff like that. So you maintain your courage 4 worst case scenario, and means that you're pretty reliable to charge stuff usually. But,
average on 2 dice is 7, so you'd probably be okay. Oh, okay, fair enough. And then the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm or Moria variant?
Yes, so Kingdom of Khazad-dûm 750 is around about the points where I would go for the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm over Moria.
Okay.
Partly because Barlin's not a reliable general to survive, whereas Durin is Durin.
Durin's a tank.
Yeah, so I'd go Durin, a Dwarf King. Similar reason for the last list, so you've got March in there. Also, Dwarf Kings are pretty awesome now, being Fight 6, Courage 6, and their Heroes of Valor. So they're
really
pretty good for 75 points. Reliable hero. And then after that, I would normally go King's Champion. The 2 banners is really useful in the Durin spoke list. King's Champion has got heroic strike and 3 attacks, so he's pretty 3 attack strength 5, so pretty strong killer himself. And then they're probably the only 3 heroes I would take at 750.
You should quite a lot of points there on heroes.
Yeah, you can't really. The way that I see it though is you essentially, with the King's Champion, you've already got the banner cost included, which I would include in the army.
Yeah, of course.
But it comes roughly to about 400-ish points. That's me not doing maths in my head, but like somewhere about that. So you're about 50% of your cost on heroes, which is probably, I'd say, what average.
It's probably about right.
So they're the heroes. I then have been a fan of recently of taking a large contingent of Vault Wardens, usually about 8 or 9.
There is a question regarding Vault Wardens later, so that's good.
And then, so they're the main block of the army, and then I'll take Dwarf Warriors with shields and a smattering of Dwarf Bowmen, both are rangers and normal warrior bowmen.
Okay.
The rangers I nearly always give throwing weapons as well, and that army will probably also come to about 40-ish models.
Are they a bit cheaper, the Dwarf Rangers?
So no, they're about the same price. They got the increased shoot value, but one less defense basically.
And the better range bow, right?
Yeah, the throwing weapon. Yeah, so the strength 2, range 24, whereas the dwarf bows are strength 3, range 18.
Okay. Is that just to give you a bit of variation, or is it the throwing weapon?
Yeah, sometimes strength 3 is handy to kill, say, an armoured horse or some defence 5 things, whereas strength 2, 3+ shoot value is a bit more reliable, and if there's defence 4 stuff around.
I guess it gives you the options to do both, which is always handy. What about the dwarf ballista? Have you ever taken those? Are they?
I have considered it. I haven't taken it at a competitive event yet, and the usual reason behind it is I would rather have more models at the points levels we often play at. If you're taking a dwarf ballista, you're either having to sacrifice, say, the King's Champion will have to become a dwarf captain instead, or you go from 40 models to 34, which is quite a dent in the army. And I'm not sure whether it gets enough reliability back. It's one of those things I would consider possibly if I was going up to 800 plus points. But below 800, I think you're better off with the models, because models do more things in more scenarios, whereas the ballista just shoots things, which is cool, but doesn't always help you win scenarios.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it looks quite good for the points, but I don't play dwarfs. That's there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll say I don't think you're being a fool for taking one. They actually do their job pretty well, and they're not too expensive. Just when it comes in order of preferences, it's a bit lower down my list.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, you're the expert, so to speak. I just looked at the profile now. I had the book out, and I was like, 60 points. It looks quite good. I just wanted to get your opinion, really. So that's 750. So the event that you won this year, which was it? Well, 1,250 points, and I believe you had Khazad-dûm again.
Yeah. So
what does that look like? That's probably either you're going to be fighting a lot of models or big stuff. So it'd be interesting to know. Well, probably both actually. A combination of a lot of models and big stuff.
So I ended up going a lot of models, really.
Right.
I've got a lot of Khazad-dûm models, and I saw it as my best chance to get as many of them on the table as possible, and to force myself to paint them. But so I had Durin, because you're going to go Durin if you're at that point of the army. Then I had Mardin, partly just for theme. Mardin, I don't think it's actually. I think he's probably the worst value for points character in the dwarf list.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is a shame. I'll get into why probably a bit later, but
sure.
So I had Mardin, and then I had 2 dwarf kings and a king's champion.
Wow.
And then once again, so they were my heroes, and then my troops. I went. So it was the block of 8 or 9 Vault Wardens again.
Yeah.
And then I had. I'm trying to remember. So.
The Hearthguard? Or that's Balin, isn't it?
Sorry?
Is it the upgrade for the Khazad-dûm? That's Balin, isn't it? For the Khazad-guard, sorry.
No, I didn't actually have any Hearthguard. So I basically had barely any Khazad-guard in any of my lists. And there is a reason for that. But and it's not because I don't rate Khazad-guard. But so on the list, so I had the Vault Wardens, then I had about 12-ish Iron Guard, 12-ish sort of Dwarf Warriors with shields, 12 dwarf warriors. Actually, it's probably 10 dwarf warriors with bows, 10 rangers with throwing axes and bows. So it was kind of like I mixed up the warbands, but it was almost like a warband of each troop type, apart from Kazagard.
Sure.
But yeah, so it came to roughly, I think it was 69 models.
Jeez.
Which I ended up being one of the largest armies there, with the exception of like the ones which you expect to be massive. So there were goblins which outnumbered me and similar, but nearly in all of my games in that event, I was putting down as many dwarves, if not more, than my opponent had model count. And then usually I was there going, well, my guys are dwarfs, which means they're better than yours are and die less. So it was.
They're very. I always find the lack of spears difficult, but they are quite forgiving because they just don't die. So.
Yeah. I think key to it is knowing how long they don't die for often, or how many models you'll need to hold up something usually.
Right.
But one of the actual big advantages of playing the dwarf list at that points level is their army bonus affects every model, so you get more value out of it. So they get the reroll ones to wound, which essentially makes the whole army that bit more reliable and more killy. Because dwarf heroes can't get cavalry, obviously. But when you're wounding on 4s or 5s or stuff like that, being able to reroll those odd ones that you roll is actually really useful at just making them that bit more reliable to kill.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, especially if I tend to, when I have a big roll, and when you have a big roll and you have 3 dice to wound or 2 dice to wound, and you end up rolling double 1 or triple 1, it's like, I really needed to get a wound there. So yeah, I can imagine, especially for free, it's just part of the army. It's incredible. So, okay, so Kazagard, not that you don't rate them, but what is your reasoning behind maybe not taking them as? Because I think they're quite popular with most people, aren't they?
Yeah. So I'm probably a bit of a maverick in the sense that because everyone knows Kazagard are pretty good.
Yeah.
I decided to build dwarf lists this year around the idea of not taking them en masse. Like I may have 1 or 2, but
sure.
Genuinely I was there going at the beginning of the year when it came to figuring out what I was going to do. I was like, I really like Vault Wardens. I don't see people take Vault Wardens. I see everyone take Kazagard. I'm going to do something different. So I took the Vault Wardens instead of the Kazagard, basically.
That's fair enough. I think you've done well with them, so it's justified. Now the Iron Guard, I like the profile Iron Guard. I think they're really, really good. Do you think they're a little bit expensive though?
Yeah, I have a sort of love-hate relationship with Iron Guard. It's one of those ones where I really like the profile, but being defense 6, so normally the lowest defense model or one of the lowest in the dwarf army, and the most expensive is a very sort of hard thing to like for when they die to like just sort of a strength 4 guy or something like that. It kind of hurts a bit more.
I played in a local event last year, and I took a full warband of Blackguard, and I played against Army of the Dead, and I lost the full warband in like 1 round of combat, and I nearly cried. It's probably similar because you think, I've got this really elite unit and they're really good, and then they lose a combat, and you're like, I've just taken off, 100 odd points of Blackguard, and I was really upset about it. But I guess it's somewhat similar to that.
So I do like Iron Guy. At the moment, I haven't been using them in my 700-ish point range lists.
Okay.
And it's partly because in order to keep the model count up, when I'm like the way I see it, you can only really afford to have one type of elite in the dwarf army at that points level. So you either have to go Iron Guard or Vault Wardens or the Cat Guard / Hearth Guard.
Right.
Once you start taking like the list predominantly out of those 3, your numbers drop quite a lot, which then you tend to struggle a lot more with scenarios.
So, how do you get around the lack of spears? This is a question from me. It's not. I don't know if anyone's asked it or not. They might have done, but
so there's
obviously with your with the army of Thror, it's not an issue because you have spearmen. It's just then maybe a lack of mobility. But obviously with the Khazad-dûm, you have Vault Warden spears, but you're not going to move them away from the vaults. That makes the actual like the shield guy. That makes no sense. Or do you?
Actually,
I don't know.
So on the Vault Wardens, actually, so the spears are strength 4 and the front guys are strength 4. They're fight 4 as well. So that with the army bonus rerolling 1s to wounds, them as a team are actually incredibly killy. So against, say, a man in orc line, they're just going to smash through it.
Right.
But, the other thing also is, so sometimes I will move the spearmen away from the Vault Wardens to support somewhere in the line where they need it more, or to support a hero. Because at the end of the day, the tower shield is defense 9. You can chuck him against 4 guys, so like 2 guys with a spear support or a hero.
Yeah.
And I'm still probably not going to die because they're needing 6s by 4s or 6s by 5s to wound me. And so they're incredibly good at just holding up models by themselves, and you can use the spear support in other places if you need it. I wouldn't say it's the go-to thing that I do, but it's on the sort of like it is the option if you need it.
I also didn't realise they do quite well against most brutal power attacks.
Oh yeah, I've played many people who have had like dragons or things like that, and they're getting ready to do a barge into someone or something like that, and then you just plonk in a Vault Warden Tower Shield, and then they can't do their jumping move. And
I've just read that now.
Yeah, and even if they're strength 6, they need 6s to wound still.
Yeah, very good for the points. Okay.
So you're asking about how to deal with the lack of spears, weren't you?
Yes.
So banners help.
Of course.
But usually it just means you have to change your mindset of how battle lines clash. So a lot of the thought process that I have when I'm sort of in a battle is, well, it's more about holding up the enemy line while the heroes or your troops basically fan out wider and go either achieve the objectives or they sweep in around the edges and start forcing one-on-ones by fighting a spearman behind and also trapping them.
Right.
So often ways that you can do that is if the guy right on the end, if there's a hero there, you can get a hero and like 2 or 3 guys. You do a heroic combat, and then that gives you the extra jump move round, and then you can basically sandwich in 3 or 4 guys on the end. And then if you can do that on both ends of the battle line, then you basically completely flank them. Which is where I like the Vault Wardens, because they can hold the centre pretty well themselves, where you can't get all the way around the back of them. So that it's kind of, rather than thinking in 2 flat lines, if you then have enough models, you can extend your line further out and then basically swamp around the edges.
Well, that makes sense. Really clever.
And the handy thing is dwarves being defense 7 and with shields often, you can just
shield.
You can reliably hold up the line and not die. I'd say I don't actually shield that much because defense 7 keeps me alive with a banner anyway. But
fair enough.
Got that option if you need it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense completely. I guess because if you had 2 heralds that are positioned, you can kind of stagger it enough that. It makes sense. Really does. Okay. Let's go on to a couple of questions because I feel like some of them might take a little while, some of them might not. We'll do the more serious questions first. Okay. Okay, so CJ has asked how you deal with the mobility requirements of the scenarios with slow infantry, and you've explained already heroic march is key. And then, how did you get the idea for the Vault Warden block, and how do you best use them? Is his next question.
Well, actually, I'll go on the mobility thing a bit more.
Okay, yeah, by all means.
It is generally it is the question I get asked most by people when I'm using dwarves, and I think part of it is at the end of the day just having a clear. It's not even just hurt march. Hurt march helps, but
Right.
having a clear idea of what the capabilities are of the individual dwarf warrior or groups.
Okay.
So I often recon's one of my favourite scenarios with dwarves, believe it or not.
Which sounds mad.
Yeah. And people who've played me at recon will probably notice I often have one half of my army will charge up to hold up the entire opponent's main force.
Right.
Or 2/3. So when I was using, say, Army of Thor, Thor and his 18 Grimmer Hammers would basically charge up, and then they'd just hold up everyone, the enemy's army in the middle and all that. Meanwhile, the captain and his warband of guys would just make a beeline for the board edge.
Okay.
And the fact is, especially in a tournament scenario, your enemy's going to struggle to break through those defense 7 dwarves who have also got the reroll and fight 4. And then your dwarf guys can just shoot off the board edge. And what it forces your opponent to decide, they're either going to have to commit a lot of resources to stopping your dwarfs getting off the captain's warband, because they're still defense 7 and hard to kill, or they're going to have to just try and completely overwhelm your center warband.
And hope that you haven't killed too much for them to get the similar models or more off. Yeah, it makes sense.
And usually I find, because people often aren't used to playing dwarf armies in certain ways, or at least Army of Thor and stuff like that. And when you've played them enough, you're the experienced guy, so you know what they're going to need to kill you and vice versa and stuff like that.
Right.
So it means that it puts your opponent at a disadvantage because they're not quite sure of what the capabilities of the army are often in those situations. So that it then tends to be if you're experienced with the dwarves, it kind of shows through.
Almost like gotcha moments all across the board.
Yeah. One other thing, or probably several other things. So there's also just generally planning ahead. So knowing what the objectives are for for the game overall, and also how you're going to achieve it. Because the fact is, if you send a group of dwarves randomly somewhere and you go, oh no, I need them on the other side of the board, it's going to be too late for them to come into there. So you have to think right at the start what you need them to do.
So I guess it's familiarization with not only the army but the scenarios, and then sitting down at the start of the game, looking at the table, deciding what you can commit to where to win the scenario, and then basically just carrying it out.
Yeah. So actually, a good example, if you look at the Twitch stream game that I had against Dave Nolan,
I'll try and find the link for that, and I'll put it in the comment section.
So it was Storm the Camp, and I think we had a 2-hour time limit. I'm not 100% sure, but it was basically I was there going, I'm not going to be able to get his camp and kill enough models within the time limit. So it was there going, straight off I knew I was going to be playing a game of trying to break him. And that's probably how I'm going to win it, because I'm not going to be able to necessarily get his leader that easily, because it was the Witch King, so on a horse, so he's maneuverable. So it was there going, I essentially need to break him and not get broken and try and protect Thor from dying, which is easy. It's fairly easy because Thor being defense 9 and the Arkenstone. But so essentially, how I played that game was with that whole idea in mind originally. And I mean, I would like people can go watch the game and that, but that it meant that I anchored around my objective, but I still sent people forward to delay him, because I also knew that if things went badly, I would need sort of. So I had like 2 warbands that went off on their own, and then I had.
Maybe I'll help, because I actually remember watching the game, not fairly recently, but I remember watching it. So you had on your objective, you had Thror with his warband, and I believe you had Thrain and a warband, and then a captain and a warband, like you said. And I believe one warband went off to the right to deal with Gullivar and his warband, and then you had almost like a flanking warband, which almost was a fake flank, because I believe, if I remember correctly, they actually came back in and helped fight in the middle, maybe.
Yeah. So that relates to actually what I was on about earlier with the movement. So that was there to weaken essentially the force that was attacking Thrain.
Yeah.
It was there going like David had to commit resources there, otherwise my dwarves could probably just run into his objective at some point. So it basically meant I spread him out, and his army and a lot of armies rely on sort of being
cohesion
together. And then as soon as you spread out opponents' armies out and they lose that cohesion, there's a lot more one-on-one fights or stuff like that, which tend to favour dwarf warriors because they don't die and they've got a high fight value.
Yes, fight 4, defense 7, probably, yeah.
But even enemy captains can't really chop up your warriors that well.
No.
Yeah, so that was the main sort of thing there. So I won't go all the way into the game, but that was generally what I did, and then it sort of worked out quite well in the end. There was some good luck, bad luck on both sides, but I'm sure you can.
I think if you watch the game tactically, you did play it incredibly well. Not to boost your ego any, but you did play it well. So mobility again, it could just be a case of going direct as you can to where you need the models to be, despite the fact you only moved 5 inches, basically.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much is as well as I can explain.
So much helps, but also being deliberate with your movement and knowing what you want those models to do.
Well, actually, one thing, it's not exactly on site, but with Heroic March, one thing that I've often done, so if there's a bit of terrain around about where your lines will probably meet or just before it, often I would have the main bulk of my force going up, and then I will lose priority, hopefully. Dwarf armies often get a lot of rerolls that now allow you to reroll the priority dice, either from the Ring of Durin or Balin. So you can do that, but if you then do a Heroic March at that point, your opponent's going to have to commit to go into one way or the other. And then suddenly you've got a movement advantage in that you can jump 8 inches around one side of the terrain, which gives you a turn or two to inflict as much damage as possible on one half of their army. Before the other half comes round. That's a trick that I quite like doing often.
So again, that's just looking at your board and figuring out before the game's even started. It's almost like not winning the game before you played the game, but it's almost like what it is. It's figuring out what you want your army to do, and then sort of baiting your opponent into playing your game as opposed to playing their game. Is that?
Dwarves are very good in fighting in sort of channels and confined spaces and that. And if you can engineer the fight to happen in those places, you're going to be onto a winner. So look out for fences or terrain or anything that basically can sort of give you the ability to stop an enemy coming around your sides or focus your resources.
It's not a question, I don't think, on here. What about cavalry? Do you struggle against cavalry?
I'm trying to think. So the most common cavalry armies that I've faced recently have been Rivendell Knights and Rohan. As in terms of pure cavalry, Rivendell Knights is normally fine. They're a bit annoying to play against because you kind of now run away and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's they're going. You outnumber them considerably. All you really need, because at some point they're going to have to charge you. You can hold you can resist the charge a little bit better than a lot of people can. And as soon as you win a priority roll or a heroic move off roll, you're on them and they're pretty much dead because they're then suddenly only getting 1 attack versus 3 or 4 dwarf ones. You just kill the horses, and then an elfin foot's not scary at all.
No, not at all.
But they're in the hands of a good player. Rivendell Knights are like a problem, but they're not a sort of game-ending sort of one.
Okay.
So then a Rohan list. So one of the games that I lost with Army of Thor last year was against World Champion using the Riders of Theoden Legendary Legion.
That one. Yeah, we love that one on the pod.
Yeah, no, which was actually the first time I played it or seen it in action because it's quite early in the year. But
It's incredibly good.
yeah, and it's one of the few armies that ever managed to break my Army of Thor.
Right.
And it was a close game. There's some weird dice rolls going all over the place at the end, but all did deserve to win it. But it was one of those ones where, because he had a lot of the heroes in that, he could charge in, burn all of his might, and inflict damage onto like a lot of kills, and he didn't have to worry about then running out of might because then it'd automatically get it back next turn.
Yeah.
Which meant he's one of the few armies when they're charging, they become strength 5 on the charge, the heroes, so my defense 7 becomes useless.
Yeah.
And then they do the heroic combats and all that stuff. So they're quite scary, which is why the issue Army 4 has, like, you basically got one turn to beat that army, which is the immediate aftermath. You kind of need to let that heroic move roll off and then get on them and do the kills then. There are ways that you can counter sort of stuff like that, which I'll probably talk about in a minute because it relates to how you face big heroes and scary things like that, which I think I sort of question posted about. So I'll save that for that bit. But yeah, no, Riders of Theoden are scary. Normal Rohan, not as scary.
Right, okay. Fair enough. Okay. So CJ's follow-up question was how did you get the ideas for the Vault Warden block and how do you use them best? Well, you explained you took them over Khazards because they're less popular.
And I think they look awesome.
They definitely do. From the picture, they look great.
Yeah, so I hadn't used Vault Wardens since my first 2 ever GBHL events.
Did you have to buy more? Because I don't know anyone else that probably has 9 or...
I had 6, I think. So I bought 3 more.
Okay.
So, yeah, I didn't have to drop 100 quid on the table in one go. Which, they've been a bit accumulated. But I remember, so the first time I took them was 2013, 2012. And essentially, this was within really early days of GBHL. And to give you an idea of, like, it doesn't matter how badly you do at your first tournament. So I came second last at this tournament. And I took Vault Wardens. And they spent most of the time getting smashed by either a Dwalin or other scary things. Or even in one game, just Orc Warriors rolling 6s by 5s to kill them.
Rough.
So, like, they were cool, but they didn't seem to be that great. And then also, I then used them at the following tournament, which I did a bit better. But equally, there's just 1 or 2 games where your opponent does roll 6s by 4s or 6s by 5s, and it goes horribly wrong. But and then from that point onwards, I then went and used the Eagles. So I kind of, for me, part of the reason why I took them is like I felt like, one, I was a lot better player than I was back then. And they got a bit better on the rules in that they ignore all brutal power attacks. And so I was kind of there going, I feel like I should give them another go and see how I do with them, really. So yeah, it was basically me not wanting to take Khazard, wanting to sort of give them a second chance, and basically just because I never seen anyone else take them. That was why I took them, really.
And then tactically, you said you like to use them as your main hold-up point, or...
Yeah, so the main anchor of my sort of battle lines, I don't normally put them all in one warband.
Okay.
Partly because of where a lot of scenarios will involve me splitting up my warbands or Maelstrom or something like that.
Yep.
But the philosophy is still the same, really, because if it's a scenario where I can deploy together, I can deploy together, that's fine. But if I've got a Maelstrom warband coming on, there'll normally be 3-ish in each warband, which will then go in the centre, and then I'll have the Dwarf Warriors and Iron Guard or whatever I've got sort of going around the flanks. Right. So it's always kind of the Vault Wardens anchoring the middle, and then the other troops, and normally the heroes going around the flanks to sort of do what I described earlier. Because part of the reason for that is because one, you then don't lose your spearmen as much or get peeled off because as soon as the Vault Warden Tower Shield loses a spear, the Tower Shield gets -1 to win combat, which you want to avoid because I mean it's -1 to win combat is really so. Putting them in the middle helps stop that, and also it just gives you a strong point in your line to basically fight around.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, his third question. How do you choose your heroes? Seems like you basically go during Barling, King's Champ, King, Captain, then Troops. And he's asked, when would you run Gimli, Mardin, Floy, or the Shield Bearer, etc.?
So, with the Khazad-dûm list, so from 600 points and under, I'll go King. Well, actually, 700 points and under, I'll go Kingdom of Moria.
Okay.
And then 700 points and up, I'll go Kingdom of Khazad-dûm.
Okay.
At the moment, the 700 point range, I want to see which one is stronger because it's at a point where there's a bit of overlap, and I'm not sure which one I prefer yet. But generally speaking, so part of the issue that so the Kingdom of Moria is the fact is Barlin's very expensive for what you get. He's 110 points for a 2-wound hero. He's got a nice set of heroics. So he's got heroic march, which means you don't need to take the captain, which is really handy at low points because you don't have the hero space. He also then unlocks Gimli. And Gimli's solid. So most of my list at that points level. So when I came second Into the West this year, and when I went to the Masters and stuff, I had basically Gimli and Barlin, who are 2 3-might heroes. They're fairly reasonable in combat. They've both got heroic strike.
Yeah.
I've got a heroic march, and Barlin can use his will point reroll quite freely because there isn't as much magic or stuff that you would need the will for at that points level.
It's still got the Durin's Axe as well, which is pretty handy.
Yeah, so it still gets the +1 to wound. But they work at that points level because you can get quite a lot of might. You can get sort of the same model range, and you've got the 2 strikers, so it works quite nicely at those points levels. Once you go up to the 700 points mark, Barlin starts to become a bit of a liability because he is, I say only a defense 8 2-wound hero with 1 fate. But the fact is you're going to start having ring race or just even an odd strength 4 person can get lucky and wound him. And he's just not a reliable general to survive. So you then have to start using him more defensively. So it's sort of Barlin and Gimli is the core of that army, and then I tend to switch over around about 700 points to Durin.
Okay.
I still think Barlin is over points, in my opinion, but he enables the list to work because you can get March with him and you can get Gimli. So it's one of those examples of where it may not be optimal in some, like on paper, but he makes the list work. The similar thing happens with Thor in Army of Thor. Thor is actually the worst of the sort of 3 big heroes because he gives you the strength 4 and it gives you the 6-inch banner. He becomes sort of essential for that list to work.
Okay.
So what are the other heroes he asked about?
You had when would you run Gimli, which you just explained.
Yep.
Mardin, Floy, and the Shield Bearer.
So Mardin I mentioned earlier. Mardin is rubbish. They're more so that. So his main strength is he's another 3-might hero in the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm list, which the only other one being Durin. His biggest issue is he's only fight 5. He's got heroic strength, which is his only heroic special action, which isn't particularly useful. You get Swarm Protector, which is all right, but and then he's sort of 3/1/1, and he's 75 points. When you compare that to the Dwarf King, the Dwarf King gets 1 less might, but he gets 1 more will. He's courage 6 anyway.
He's got a better fight value.
Yeah, it's fight value 6, and he gets heroic march. And in the end, the needs of the list need heroic march more than the extra point of might, and the extra will point's pretty useful. Once you take the dwarf, when you take Durin as well, the Dwarf King becomes courage 7 because of the Warhorn, so Swarm Protect is pretty redundant. And it also, the Dwarf Kings now are Heroes of Valor as well, whereas Mardin isn't. And their defense 8, it's basic. There's so many things that you have to sacrifice just gets that 1 extra point of might, and at the end of the day, I don't think it's worth it. And so, unless if I'm going particularly themey or fluffy, I would take the Dwarf King pretty much every time.
Okay. And Floy?
Floy, I think, is really good. I have theorised quite a lot at 800 points taking him. You can't take him with Durin, so he has to go into the sort of army or the Moya version of the list, which, as I said, I'm not sure how strong it is once you go up to sort of 800 points. Floy, so when I'm considering stuff for like team events like the ETC or something, for example, Floy brings a certain level of disruption to your opponent's plans and stuff like that. And if you ask, some people know me, I like to take lists that basically ruin opponents' fancy tricks or stuff like that. And so he's quite handy in that sense, because he can shut down like several rules, or like the Shadow Lord's sort of shooting thing, or stuff like that, or a burly 1 turn on someone with a 2-handed weapon and things, and like do nice little surprise on that. It tends to be so because you have to take him Barlin, so I'd be going Barlin Gimli, and then I would still normally probably go for the King's Champion, and then I would go for either Floyd or the Shield Bearer, depending what I thought I needed. Whether I wanted to disrupt my opponent more, or if I wanted to make my army a bit more reliable, depends on which probably segues quite nicely into the Shield Bearer, who I really like the Shield Bearer. I would take him more. The points levels this year haven't quite worked out to put him in the list. His biggest issue is being a minor hero, which meant that in order to get the model count up when you're sort of, because I tend to take quite low numbers of heroes, it tends to be max troops. He can be a bit more difficult to fit in. However, partly now the King's gone up to a Hero of Valor, it makes it a bit easier. But I really like re-rolling courage for 12-inch bubbles, really good. Just being able to do a free heroic combat every turn is pretty handy. Just to basically work your way through troops, even if he's only engaged with 1 person, which is probably what I do. You can just sort of kill an extra troop possibly every turn or so, than you normally would, which actually over the course of 5 or 6 rounds of combat makes quite a big difference.
Definitely, yeah.
So yeah, I would probably, he would, in the army of sort of Durin, he's probably my sort of 3rd or 4th hero, depending on the points level. It's sort of, if I say my 700 point army I took to the GT this year, if I was to put that up to the 750, I'd be tempted just to drop the Shield Bearer in. But I think the Shield Bearer is more useful in the Barlin list, because Durin's got the Warhorn, which means that your army's courage 5, whereas the Shield Bearer basically means you don't need to buy a Warhorn, so because you're re-rolling courage 4, so
it's really good. Within 12 you get to do a re-roll for courage. It's really good.
Yeah, so the way that I then see it is, if I was going to take a Warhorn, I'm now just paying 30 points for the sort of a kind of mini captain with the heroic combat bonus. He would be a lot more common, I think, if he had more than just one might as a heroic stat, because he hasn't got any fate or will, which is a bit sad. I think he should be 1-1-1 personally, but I still like him. It's just he fits in at certain points level.
I mean, even if he went to 10 points more and you had 1-1-1, it'd definitely be worth it.
Yeah. No, it's just sort of like I like him, and I think he's useful. And I definitely do consider taking him. It's just that happens to be the points levels I've played so far this year haven't really. He hasn't really fit in, mainly because there's been a lot of low points, or I've taken Dewar and other stuff instead.
Fair enough. His next question was, ranged weapons. You've already kind of covered this a little bit. Ranged weapons, defense 6 dwarf bow or defense 5 longbow, and when is a ballista a good investment?
So yeah, I like to go 50-50. Because a dwarf warrior with bow is still as good in combat as pretty much most elite troops. At the end of the day, they're still defense 6, still fight 4, still courage 4. So they're better than a warrior of Minas Tirith. They're sort of they're better than most troops still. So you can still use them in combat. So when I take dwarf rangers, so I'll take 50-50, but when dwarf rangers, I normally like to try and take a throwing weapon. Because a 3+ throwing weapon is really useful, and it makes the dwarf rangers have a bit more punch in combat to make up for their lack of defense. So they're really handy if you can get a charge on a hero on a horse or a Gulliver or something like that. It just gives you sort of a 1 in 6 chance or something like that to take out their horse or inflict a wound or something like that often. And just doing 1 or 2 extra kicks is really handy.
And they've got Mountain Dweller if you ever need it.
Yeah. Which actually, one thing I'll say is comes in more handy now than it used to. I think because back in the day, there only used to really be buildings and trees on boards.
Yeah.
Where now, I think because tiers have built up their terrain to quite a bit more. There's a lot more piles of rocks and rubble and stuff like that on the boards, which is nice because I never got to use Mountain Dweller, and now actually it comes up probably once a tournament at least, I would say. Right. Actually, going off on a tangent, talking about Dwarf Rangers.
We love a tangent.
At the beginning of the new edition, I actually podiumed a couple of times at low point events. Good v Evil with a dwarf ranger list. So it was completely anti-normal dwarf in the sense that apart from my heroes, I didn't have a single defense 7 model. Actually, no, that's a lie. I had one which was a banner with a shield, but it was essentially Iron Guard and dwarf rangers with throwing axes, and dwarf bowmen led by, I think I had a king, I had a captain with shield and a shield bearer. So there's a list which I took a shield bearer, and I think it's 500 points and had about 30 models. 8 or 9 of them were Iron Guard, 10 bowmen, and the rest dwarf rangers with throwing axes. And at those points levels, that many throwing axes is absolutely devastating. When you're only using a lot of people armies between 20 and sort of 30 tops models, if you're killing 3 or 4 people every time you charge, it makes a massive dent into your opponent's army.
I've had something similar with my Corsair lists when you're throwing that many throwing weapons.
Yeah, it works pretty much the same idea as the Corsair list. Exactly. And then that list sort of, so it didn't have any named heroes at all. The Dwarf King, at the time, because he was only Hero Fortitude, wasn't my general because he was fight 6, so he could go and kill people, like take on enemy heroes, and then you can trap and do stuff with Iron Guard, and then they're pretty reliable killing machines at that point. But it was specifically designed with the idea of I was going to be playing Good v Evil. Because I quite like writing lists for Good v Evil because it adds a certain level of list theory building level to it. Because a lot of evil armies won't be fight for, or fight for will be where they cap that out. There's a lot more strength for in evil armies, so that means that defense 6 over defense 5 becomes a lot more redundant.
Right.
Shooting tends to only be strength 2 or strength 4. They don't really have any strength 3, which means that defense 5 once again is just as good as defense 6. And then if your strength 3 or 4 hitting back at them, they never have higher than defense 6 anyway, and then they've usually defense 5 or defense 4, often more so.
Right.
So it basically, the idea was that the dwarf rangers with the banner of being fight 4 are still going to win quite a few combats.
Yeah.
They're going to be not dying any more so than if I had defense 6 guys. I know dwarves can get defense 7 anyway, but it was basically there going, I'm not losing out on the dwarf bowman in that situation. And then tracking in the throwing weapons and all that, there's going to be a lot more defense 5 or defense 4 troops around for them to get munched and obliterated by the throwing weapons. Whereas if I played elf army at the time, which would have there were lots of cur downs as well, so blind light would be horrible, but them being defense 6 or Gundor or anyone mains that the throwing weapons are doing half the damage they would do normally. So the list wouldn't be anywhere near as good versus a good army. Whereas against evil army, it was pretty successful.
Oh, well, there you go.
So that's an insight into my thought building process for certain events and that.
That's very interesting. CJ's final question. Troops he's put, are Hearthguard worth it? Khazad or Ironguard, Warriors or Rangers? We've already said with the range, well, for archery purposes, you have a mix anyway.
Yeah.
If you were objective, if you weren't taking them because everyone takes them, what would you pick? And I think that's what he's asking, kind of.
So between the Rangers and the Bowmen.
Well, it's are the Hearthguard worth it? First, do you think they're worth it?
No, I don't. I think they're a bit of a trap. Like, Hearthguard are really good at doing what they're meant to do, which is killing. I may consider taking a couple in my list, just if I've got the spare points, and like not the man spaces. But at the end of the day, you're already spending 160 points on Durin. The dwarf army needs a lot of infantry to help cover the board space, in my opinion. And once you start making Khazad, which are already fairly expensive at 11 points more expensive, they end up, your numbers drop too much.
Was it a point, the upgrade?
There's 2 points, so they go from 11 to 13. And the fact is, if you've got the army bonus, being strength 4 rerolling 1s is killy enough most of the time, in my opinion. I don't think you get the benefit that you would need to overcome. Like, first of all, if Khazad can kill anyone normally, then it probably would be. But because they can, I don't think Hearthguard is worth it, really.
Okay, fair enough. His next question: Khazad or Ironguard? Or the next part of the same question, rather.
I would probably. I'm going to cop out and say it depends on what's in the rest of my list, really.
Yeah, of course.
I would often originally I probably would have said both, because there's you could do a similar thing to what I explained in that you can have the Khazad Guard anchoring your centre line, and then you can have the Iron Guard around the edges. Realistically, though, if you're going Iron Guard, you're probably better off with Dwarf Warriors with shields to anchor your centre line because they're just as survivable, but you can shield instead. If you're going to ally, so if you're using convenient allies, I would say Khazad Guard. If you're going pure dwarfs, with the idea that you've probably got a lot of dwarf warriors or something else instead, I'm going to say marginally personal preference is Iron Guard at the moment.
Okay.
But that's as long as you have a thing inbuilt in your list to overcome courage issues. So, like, I've got the Warhorn or the Shield Bearer usually, or both.
Yep.
Whereas if you don't have that, the Kazagard are better because Bodyguard is really handy just to be able to charge it. So it's a very even match, and it kind of depends on what you've built the rest of the list like, in my opinion.
Okay, fair enough. And then finally, Warriors or Rangers?
So if there were bows, I go a 50-50 split.
Okay.
Without bows, always dwarf warriors with shields.
Yep.
Defense 7 with a shield is so much better than. But I say always. I just explained the list that I took. Dwarf Rangers with throwing axes, but in a standard any matchup at say 700 points, dwarf warriors.
Do you ever have the two-handed axe option or not?
No. Generally, I don't think there are enough situations where I use it. If I've got a few Kazagard dropped in my list, they're the two-handed axes that I'd need. Sure. But usually, you're grinding your opponent out with dwarfs. You've always got the option to go piercing striking anyway if you need an extra bit of killing power. So
right.
I don't usually ever go two-handed axe unless if I'm feeling slightly maverick.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so the next question is from Sam Palmer, and he has asked, what do you hope to see from the hinted at warrior expansion in the Lord of the Rings army book?
I would like to see more, basically just dwarf heroes with 3 might. It's the one thing that the list lacks.
Okay.
As soon as you go up to 700, 800 points, you're usually slightly low on might compared to how most armies will look. So my Durin list that I was on about earlier only has 7 might. And really, I'd want 8 or 9, ideally.
Right.
Sort of 7's just one bit too low, but that's one thing you got to get used to with dwarf armies. You're always going to be slightly low on might when you're going Kingdom of Khazad-dûm normally.
Okay.
So I'd like to see just a few more dwarf heroes, just for some flexibility. I feel like there are some cool legendary legion or something, which say for when Durin and that are fighting the Balrog could be awesome. Something that makes Marden good. Like if Marden had heroic strike or fight 6 natural, that he would be able to find his way into the list a lot more.
Right.
So maybe if there's a special rule in there that made Marden, I don't know, like a shield bearer and he got to call heroic combats or something like that would be good.
You could have the a warrior expedition legendary legion. That'd be quite cool as well.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I think just a few legendary legions, maybe a couple extra new sort of heroes would be good. Okay. Looking at the sort of Khazad-dûm side of things, but just a few more heroes and a few more cool little things or legions to add into my army list thoughts.
Nice. Kieran Hatton has asked, he asked a question I already asked, but he asked, how do you work around your lack of any real spear support options when most armies bring infantry blocks with spears to the table? And you already went through that, so.
Yeah, just summarise that. Basically, with dwarves, you don't play them like other armies, and it's quite hard to get your head around that initially because we kind of become ingrained with the idea that there should be 2 infantry lines sort of the spear supports engaging each other. And once you can dispose of that idea, you'll find that it's a lot easier to sort of use dwarves and find ways to beat other people's armies.
Well, arguably it could work with any army if you've got something that's a strong enough pivot in the middle.
Yeah. The other option you've got actually with those infantry lines is, so I use my hero. Actually, I think there's a question coming up, but I use my heroes probably differently to most armies use their heroes, and I charge them in against infantry as opposed to using them to go hero hunting.
Yeah.
But I think there was a question about that, but if not, I'll explain it at the end.
Okay. Tom Maynard has asked, what do you say to people that say or used to say that Lord of the Rings dwarves, i.e. Durin's folk or Khazad-dûm or whatever they're called now, don't and won't win events? Well, you've won events with them, so...
Yeah. So I understand why people say that. They do have poor matchups sometimes, but I think they're much more capable of it in the new rules than they were in the old rules, arguably. Just because of where Magic's a bit less prevalent and the army bonuses kicked in, because they work better in the new meta than they did in the old meta. Again, it comes down to the fact that I think a lot of people who use dwarves at events tend to be either newer players, or they're going for they're not with aspirations to win the event. I would say, any sort of major ones, they tend to take Durin and Mardin and then sort of some Hive Guard because they're cool and they smash things, which they are. But they're not as good at objective play. So it's basically just they're going. You have to be really on it and with the scenarios to work out how to play. And as I said, my first event I took dwarves, I came second last. I didn't take them every year, but 3 years later or whatever it was, I won an event with them and I podiumed quite regularly with dwarves now. So it's kind of just they take a while to get used to win on the top tables. They're quite good to get you going. They're easy to get you to the mid tables and fighting competitively, but there's quite a big jump, I think, between mid tables and top tables.
As someone who's very much a mid table player, I completely agree. You have knowing a list and knowing its strengths and weaknesses can get you so far, and then you have to almost learn another level of the game to be considered a top table player, in my opinion. But it's learning how certain situations are going to pan out and things like that. Just sort of it's being able to do that plan ahead kind of thing and react. So when your sort of your sort of plan A doesn't work, knowing how to get yourself out of that and things like that. Because the dwarf plan A is pretty simple. It's kind of move forward, don't die, and grind out the opponent. Sure.
But once, say, your opponent isn't dying, or you've lost a few sort of Vault Wardens early on or something like that, being able to then react to that and counter it is, I think, the hard bit for dwarves, because of where they don't have the movement to sort of have an Imrahil charging from the other side of the board to bail out your right flank or something like that. It's the bit where it then becomes difficult to sort of overcome those things, to go, instead of winning 3 or 4 games, winning 5 or 6 at an event.
Okay. Fair enough. Next question. Tom Ramsden has asked, thoughts on Mirren and Dra? What lists would you take them in with beyond the Minas Tirith, Kyrian and Iron Hills, if any?
I used to really like them, and then they took them out of the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm list.
They're in the Wanderers list now, aren't they?
Yeah, because ironically, you didn't used to see them in the old edition because of where it was 150 points and you only got the 11 spare warband slots. Whereas because of where Durin or Barlin could lead 18 now and Kings can lead 15, that wouldn't have been as much of a problem. I like them. They get you 6 might on the table, heroic strike, and a expert shot dwarf with 3 might, which is always quite handy with a strength 3 bow. He's still defense 7, so all right in combat. It's again one of those things where it's sort of say I'd built a 700 point Iron Hills army. I thought about them sometimes, and I wouldn't and it was going up to 750, but I'd maxed out my warbands. I'd probably go for upgrade a captain to Mirren and Dra, because then you get the strike and the sort of 2 blocks of 3 might, which you can move around the board and so sort of spread around. I like them. I think they are better in the actual Kyrian Gundor list, to be honest.
Right. I didn't even know that was a thing until someone asked the question and I looked. So.
Yeah, no, I've played against that list once.
Can they lead heroes in Minas Tirith then, or is that a really stupid question?
Sorry?
What would they be able to lead in that list though? Would it not just be the two of them?
I don't think they can lead anything. I can have a quick look actually. I do have the book now. But the fact is, the Minas Tirith heroes that you take with them are pretty cheap. So
yeah,
like you can afford to sort of indulge and still get enough models on the board, which is why they're easier to take than they are in the Iron Hills army.
Right.
No, I like them. I think they're cool. They don't really fit the Iron Hills aesthetic, which is only the sad thing. But I wish they were still in the Kingdom of Khazad list because they're the free might heroes I'm kind of looking out for.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say in that bit. Yeah, no, I think they have a place. They're not going to be the first name on the sheet unless if you're building that Gondor list, I think.
Right.
But I think Will Champion, the second time I've name dropped him, he's one of the really good Iron Hills players. Has used it in an Iron Hills list
okay.
quite well. Because Iron Hills also have the same thing that Khazad do a bit, in that they've only got one, as in pure Iron Hills, not the Champions available. They've only got one free might hero.
Yeah.
So being able to drop in an additional 6 might is pretty handy, really.
Yeah.
So that's where they're useful, is when you need that might boost. Once you get up to 750, 800 points, potentially, just they're good at sort of giving you that might, and they're not bad in combat. Murin gives you +1 to wound against most evil things which aren't a man. And
yeah, orcs, goblins, urks.
Yeah, no, I like them. I can't find where Gondor is. That's a way of hand, fiefdoms, armor. So, where is I don't know where it's actually written in here about the taking them and that.
It's in the Wonders in the Wild section.
Is it Wonders? No, that'd be fine.
But obviously, they're heroes of fortitude, but I don't think they can lead anything in that army. So
yeah. So yeah, they just become historical allies. But fact is, 140 points. Oh, they went down 10 points from last edition. And then Kieran's like 55, 60. Magil's similar cost. It's kind of one of the lists where you don't have a big killy hero. You've kind of mass out troops and stuff, which I kind of quite like doing that sometimes. I quite like a lot of small heroes because back in the old edition, I used to run a dwarf list, which basically just had a whole load of dwarf captains or kings.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, if a dwarf king fails, it doesn't hurt so much. And if you've got 3 of them, averages sort of pan out a bit better than, say, if you've just got Durin who manages to flub his dice roll on a really crucial combat. It hurts quite a bit more when that happens. So it's kind of one of those sort of things where sometimes having loads of little heroes can inflict more damage than one big hero across all 4 of their combats.
Yeah, as you say, if you use them more to kill troops rather than try and fight other heroes, then it makes sense. For the questions from the East Anglia page, Kieran Street has asked, do you rate Grimhammer's winky face? I think we know why. Okay, so the questions from the Great British Hobbit League. Now, some of these are just probably jokes, but we'll ask them anyway because, you know. Dewey has asked, why does he have such a fascination with people with short legs?
It's the beards. Actually, in honesty, I don't know why I started really liking dwarves. I think Gimli was my favourite character in Lord of the Rings when I was younger.
Okay.
It was probably where it started. And I just like the stubborn nature of them. I'm probably a bit stubborn myself sometimes. And I get beard envy.
Right, babyface, fair enough. David Clubley has asked, has Ali ever considered buying his hotel room for an event? And Well, you already answered the question, but
Yeah.
I'll defend you. He does. He just doesn't sleep in them.
Yeah. No, I'm actually better than I used to. I think that was my uni student days. I'm not saying it still doesn't happen all the time, but put it this way, I get convinced to go out drinking a lot by the guys in the community.
He says convinced. Doesn't take a lot.
Yeah, and usually part of that is, well, it's going to be easier if I just sleep on their floor than trying to find my way back to my hotel by myself. And true story, the one time that I did do that, went out in Steve Crow's event when it was back in Altrincham.
Right.
I went back to my own hotel room, and then I woke up in the morning. My phone was dead. I didn't have my charger, and I only vaguely knew where the venue was. And then I missed the first game because I couldn't get to the venue. So the moral of the story was I was better off waking up on someone else's floor, and then I'll be able to get to the venue.
Oh, brilliant. Callum Eden's asked, why are you so creepy?
So Callum likes to call me Creepy Ali, and I call him Old Man. There's a long backstory to that, so it'll probably take a while to explain.
All right. Another Alastair has asked, do people ever spell your name wrong? I imagine they do.
Yeah, all the time. I was very impressed you didn't spell my name wrong in that post, actually.
I may have if it didn't come up with you tagged. I may have spelt it ALI, but yeah.
You could have taken the credit then, like.
Well, I'm an honest guy, you know. I'm an honest guy. Jasmine has asked, do you like squash? This caused further follow-up questions. David commented saying, I find squash like pumpkin can be quite unpleasant if undercooked or otherwise improperly prepared. I assume Ali has similar opinions. And then Jasmine responded, I was actually talking about liquid, sometimes to refer to as cordial, but I appreciate your insights into vegetables. And then your brother chimed in with, well, I thought you meant like the sport squash, which I think you do play, don't you?
Yeah, no, so I played it quite a lot, and I used to work as a squash coach as well. But I know Jasmine played as well, which is partly why she asked it. But it was kind of stems from the first tournament that I won. I think I'd come straight from a squash thing, so I had all my squash gear with me. So basically, Will Champion and James Long were on about I did it from my squash club, and I have a lot of stories that would basically my two stories normally revolve about either squash or wargaming. So and so basically that became a thing that pretty much every event that I go to, I go tell them a story about squash or something now.
So it's a bit of a mean question. Fair enough.
Yeah. Although on the pumpkin version, I do have some great recipes for small squashes and stuff like that. If anyone wants them.
Well, there you go. Well, we're not in. It's coming into warmer climates now, but when we get back towards September, hit Ali up. He'll hook you up with some pumpkin or squash recipes.
Yeah.
Andy Attil has asked. He put sorry to be a killjoy and ask an actual question. But on the dwarf heroes, they get charged because they are not mounted and are not always as tough as they seem when modifiers are included in the dice and double for prone. And he's asked what to do.
Cool. So, one, as I mentioned briefly earlier, I don't use my dwarf heroes against enemy heroes usually. If I do, it's actually to hold them up, and so normally I've worked out that the hero won't die from whatever that they're facing. So, avoiding monsters is a good one because they do just rend you, and that's pretty scary. But my dwarf heroes, I will usually, so say for the first round of combat, I may have the dwarf heroes actually an inch back from my line, or however much, so they can't get charged. Because as a dwarf player, you're not going to pick the first rounds of charges usually, unless if you've been able to sort of heroic march into your charge range with your opponent, but you can't really rely on that. So sometimes you have to go, I may not have my heroes for the first round of combat, but it then means that Azog or like Elendil or someone who could probably kill a dwarf hero in one turn isn't isn't able to charge you. So don't always have your dwarf heroes in your line where they can get charged. Sometimes have them standing a little bit further back or around the flanks and that, and just acknowledge the fact you may not be able to use them for the first round of combat, which is fine because your troops are normally resilient enough to not die too much. And then what I would use with my dwarf, so as a general rule, and it applied a lot when I was using Army of Thor, if I can keep my numbers at equal to my opponent or greater, I'm probably going to win the game. Because the dwarf warriors are more survivable than enemy troops against heroes and stuff like that. So I would use my heroes just to kill as many troops reliably each turn. This means I wouldn't be doing heroic combats with them. I would often just use might to bump a 4 into a 5 to kill an extra guy. Because when it comes to might, I have a sort of, I'm not saying you never do heroic combats. There are situations where they're useful, but it's there going like, if you're using a might point to guarantee something, so to guarantee killing someone, you've used that might point effectively. Whereas sometimes if you do a heroic combat, especially if your hero's only got 3 attacks and you don't get knocked down, anyone who's ever used foot heroes or a dwarf army or something like that will know the amount of times that will go horribly wrong, and then you may have to use more might to try and bail you out, and then that ends up failing, and it all can go horribly wrong. Whereas if you just go based off the idea that, say, Durin is a combat with 2 guys, and I'm going to go, Durin's going to kill 1, hopefully 2 of those guys. I roll, kill 1, and one of them's 1 off. I may use a might point to kill that other guy. And then if you do that across with the 3 or 4 heroes that you've got, you'll find that you'll actually kill just as quite a few models more, and your army starts to outnumber your opponents more.
I guess if you can reliably kill 6 models a turn as opposed to riskily maybe kill 3 or 4, or 1 or 2 extra. Sorry, so if you can reliably kill 6 as to opposed to maybe 8 or 9, then I guess.
So I think the easiest way to think about it is like, I know I'm going to kill 4 if I do it that way. Whereas if I don't do it that way, I'm either going to kill 2 or 6. If that makes sense. So basically, I'm then playing a game where I'm taking the variables out of it as much as I can. So I know what I'm going to have to do next turn and how.
Especially with a reroll of 1s to wound as well.
So it basically just means that I'm having to react less and stuff like that, and it's just keeping up the kill count, because that at the end of the day is really important, because if your opponent outnumbers you as a dwarf when you're playing domination or capture control, you're going to really struggle to get on those objectives with the movement disadvantage, and if you're outnumbers disadvantage. So there's that. Dealing with enemy heroes. Part of the reason why I take a few bowmen is because if you get a lucky shot, you can get lucky. And also throwing weapons are pretty handy. As I mentioned briefly earlier, if you've got a dwarf ranger with a throwing axe charging a mounted hero, you may be able to kill the horse. But usually, if you're facing foot heroes, they're not scary at all to a dwarf army. Most heroes are strength 4, 3 attacks if they're scary 1. That's not when they need 6s to wound you. It's not particularly scary actually. They're not even guaranteed to kill 1 dwarf. A charging hero with a lance is a bit more scary because they are likely to kill 1, but often. So there was a game that I played against Jay Clare at Reading last year, and he was using Azog and White Warg. The whole game basically was I didn't charge Azog with any of my heroes until I needed to, as in I dealt with the rest of the army. It was basically just playing a game of feeding Azog one guy, or making sure Azog could never kill more than 2 or 3 people a turn. Which essentially means that your heroes and all your troops can go munch his rubbish troops or his captains and stuff like that. And then you can deal with Azog when essentially all you need is to win that 1 roll off instead. And then Azog will die instantly, rather than, say, Thor is not going to beat Azog. He may survive because of the Arkenstone, but realistically, Thor's going to do better killing troops.
Yeah.
While 2 or 3 Grim Hammers, just fight him. A trick that I do with Grim Hammers is so against heroes, the strength 4 ones especially, they can go bash. If you get lucky and win that combat, you are just as likely to you're more likely to knock your opponent off the horse and onto their arse than you are just to kill the horse often, or it's the same roll or something like that. And then the enemy's on the floor, and you can just keep bashing him on the floor, meaning that there'll be a turn when, so even if they win, they can't make strikes. So a good trick that I did several times. So when I've done Contest of Champions, with that army I was using Thor, who's okay, but he's not great. 3 attack strength 4 heroes aren't reliably killy, especially when I would be, say, facing a Dane or a Boromir or something like that. So I would often, 1, do the minimize damage, 2, bash them onto the floor, and then in Contest of Champions, you just keep bashing them on the floor and minimize the amount of damage they do, and then Thor would go around, get all the kills that he needed, and then he comes up and at the end kills their hero. And then so it actually works quite well in that scenario, stuff like that. So that was a bit of a tangent, but thinking about what type of weapons, especially with Army of Thor, they have, like bash is incredibly useful at stopping the game ending as well, because it's an option you've got not to kill your opponent.
Yes, almost like shielding with shields, obviously, but
so that whole army, the Army of Thor, either has a shield or a hammer usually. So the whole army can decide not to kill if it wants to. Which is a strength that I didn't think about before I started using it, and then it kind of like, oh, I can do this. That's quite handy actually.
Yeah, it's very good. I'll ask another question. It's before we get on to the last couple. What about allies? When would you take, or when would you consider taking allies? Because the Army of Thor has some pretty good green allies, in my opinion. I'm not sure about Khazad-dûm, but
so Kingdom Warrior doesn't have any. They're impossible with everyone, so you wouldn't take allies if you're taking them. Khazad-dûm are yellow with the elves generally, and I think yellow with Arnor. So I haven't used allies, partly because I wanted to just use the armies pure. But so with the Khazad-dûm, I hate elves because I'm a dwarf. So I mean, I've come up with list theories with elves where it's kind of like you got, say, a front rank of Iron Guard supported by Elf Spear support, and there's a Kurdan in there, so you can basically have a horrible front line of 3 attacks, 2 at strength 4, fight 5. You have the terror bubble, you can't be shot, and all this other stuff, which would be pretty horrific as a battle line fighting thing. I haven't used it because I don't want to use the elves, but there probably are some good options in there.
The reroll ones for the Iron Bones is actually incredibly good, though. Yeah,
so that's the thing that was going to... The issue, though, once you do that, is you do lose the reroll ones. So your hero, the dwarf heroes, become less reliable. So when most of those lists, I sacrificed the hero killy power, as it were, in exchange for the Iron Guard, because the Iron Guard being 2 attack strength 4 make up for the sort of the lack of killing power that your heroes, or reliability in killing power. So it's kind of, when I was building this, it's a trade-off going, you have to make sure your troops are then reliable enough to do the killing that you don't need the heroes to do it for you. So it was often those lists I wouldn't have Durin or people like that. I'd just have like the Dwarf Kings and similar. So or the King's Champions. It was kind of like you kind of ditch your big heroes in exchange of having the stronger troops. The more likely alliance that I thought about with that is doing Arnor, though. Because I like Arnor because you can get Arviduri, who's a cheap hero of valor. It's about 80 points, I think. And you can... Warriors of Arnor are pretty good. They're fight 4, defense 6. Charge has been their main downfall. But this is the sort of army where I'd then actually probably use Kazagard potentially.
Well, and they all have spears.
Yeah, so you can go to front rank Kazagard and back rank Warriors of Arnor, and then that's a pretty good sort of like killing thing. It's and then so I think one of the lists I came up with, I can't remember the exact points, but it'd be like, so you can have Durin, who gets the Warhorn to make the Arnor courage 3, so they're sort of a bit more reliable courage wise.
Yeah.
So you won't get the army bonus, and it's one of the few times I considered using Hearthguard actually. Because of where Arnor's cheaper, you can get the numbers up, and so it means that, and you lose the army bonus again. So going the front rank of guys being strength 4 burly 2-handed, suddenly becomes a lot better because you've then got that consistency in killing, but you can still maintain the numbers.
Yeah.
I don't have Warriors of Arnor, which is part of the reason why I haven't tried it out actually yet, but that's an alliance which I've thought about, and it may be worth losing the army bonus just to see how it works. I don't know if it would be any better than what I'm currently taking, but it'd be different.
Okay.
And I don't think it'd be necessarily any worse. So that's Khazad-dûm.
Mm-hmm.
Army of Thor. So Army of Thor, their green allies are Iron Hills and Dale. Army of Thor's biggest weakness is they don't have any shooting, which means that, well, they got 6-inch throwing weapons, but apart from that, it means that you're always going to be slightly dictated to what your opponent's doing. You can't, you have to fight your way out. You can't just use tricks or anything like at range, which basically leaves. So Dale sounds like a good option. Because I like Girion. Girion's a good hero. He's got like the bard shooting rule with the great bow.
Yeah.
And he's a hero of valor, which is handy. But the problem is, you then, to get just 5 bows, you have to get 15 Warriors of Dale.
Yeah.
And while the bowmen are good, the Warriors of Dale themselves aren't as good as a dwarf warrior with spear and shield. Because you lose 2 points of defense, I think a point of courage. And they're basically the same points or 1 point cheaper, which at the end of the day, because you're still going to only be moving 5 inches as well, even their 6-inch move isn't going to be really worth it. So it's not worth it really. You just don't get to get the bows, you lose so much of the army, because part of the strength of that army is just being defense 7 across the board, being able to put 40 models down, which everyone needs 6s to wounds pretty much, is the main strength of that list.
Right.
I've considered allying Girion on his own, if the points level's there, because he's still quite a good hero, I think. But
be great for assassination.
Yeah, any hero with multiple shots and might and a strength 4 bow, in my opinion, is pretty handy for certain little jobs, that like maybe killing a ringwraith from Fell Beast or shooting a horse away or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the other ally to consider is then the Iron Hills. So what often happens when I start considering dropping Iron Hills in is your list becomes more and more Iron Hills the more optimum you try and make it.
Right.
Because the simple fact is Iron Hills is I call them dwarves on easy mode, because especially if you look at Champions of Erebor, like they've got shooting, they've got cavalry, they've got killy heroes.
They're very forgiving for a newer player.
Yeah. Like apart from on your pocket, they are the sort of easiest army I think to use out of the dwarves. And there are lists that you can come up with. So one of the things that I look at when I'm doing it is you can either look at it and go, you can then take Army of Thor and take, because Army of Thor has got a really nice range of heroes. The handicap is normally limited to you having to take Thor and the captain first, because you need the strength 4 and the march. You can take Dane, who will give you March anyway, or any of the captains, which are pretty good because they can get lancers and mounted from Iron Hills. would get you to march, and the Iron Hills troops are strength 4 basic anyway. So you can then actually just use it almost more as a way of getting access to the heroes that the Iron Hills pure list doesn't have. So you can go like a Dane, a Freyne, and a sort of young Fortin, young Dwarlin or something like that. And then you go a front rank of Iron Hills dwarfs supported by just dwarf warriors with spears. And so you lose the 6-inch banner, but that banner wouldn't affect the Iron Hills anyway. But then you gain like the +1 reinforcement roll and Master Battle and Dane are the captains who are pretty killy. So it's kind of there going, if you don't mind losing the banner, it's a good way of getting access to the other heroes. Or the other option is you can go, you do take 4, and you take the strength 4 Grim Hammers, and then you can get strength 4 spear supports instead. So it's kind of like you go 4 and captains from Iron Hills, probably, and go Grim Hammers and strength 4 spear support, or you go Dane and then you go for like Freyne and Young 4 and the sort of killy cool heroes that you get in Army of 4, which you can't always take both of those two. I personally would probably go the Dane route because Dane's just awesome.
Really, he's really good.
And Freyne and that are really cool as well. So it's doable, and I think they're good lists. I just don't own an Iron Hills army, and at the time there were quite a lot of people using Iron Hills, and no one was using Army of Thor. That's why I did go pure Army of Thor. But no, it's worth considering. You can drop the blister in, which can help shooting things, and a few goat riders and stuff like that as well to help objectives. But yeah, this definitely probably makes the list a bit stronger doing that.
Fair enough. Thomas Smith has asked, what scenario do you A, rub your hands together, B, seek a challenge, and C, think, oh, sod it?
So I already mentioned I really like Recon.
You did, which I found odd, but fair.
Yeah, Recon's one of my favourite scenarios in all of the game. And I really like playing it with dwarves because once you understand the dwarves, as I said, it works perfectly to the strength, because Recon's all about knowing how to hold up your opponent while getting yourself off the board. It basically works perfectly for how I sort of like to use my dwarves.
Yeah.
Dave Farmer recently, when we were going through the sort of new scenarios when we were at the GT, and I can't remember the names of the new ones, but there's a couple of ones which is like Command the Battlefield, I think, the one where you've got the 4 quarters that you need to capture.
It's Command the Battlefield, yeah.
Stuff like that. And basically, I hadn't read it at the time, but he said it to me, and he was like, this is completely me all over kind of scenario with my dwarves. It's one that I'm going to love in that, because I love our scenarios where the armies have to separate and stuff like that, and then you micromanage across different fields of the battle and stuff like that, because I think it's actually where dwarves, I think this is going back to the difference between being mid-tier with dwarves and top tier is mid-tier is a dwarf army where people will fight in a battle line, and I think top tier is a completely different change of mindset, in that you then start to prefer the armies where they're the scenarios which make you split up and fight in little individual pools, because it's completely different in how you play with it. And I think that's probably why less people go top table, to relate back to the question from ages ago now. But, I tend to like Recon or like Command the Battlefield or stuff like that quite a lot. One of my favourite scenarios to play when I was using Army of Thor was Contest of Champions, actually, weirdly, because it was a challenge usually, because most people at the points levels that I was playing at, so 700 plus, will have a better killy hero than I do. Yeah,
you're probably Elendil, Boromir, Aragorn, Gil-galad.
Yeah, so I had to use the thing. Like, I remember the first time I started realising about the bashing thing and shielding and stopping the game ending by it going down below 25%, I think, or whatever it was, playing those scenarios, and they were just like, because it made me properly think, going, oh, I've actually got to work out how to win this, and then it was quite satisfactory. And I'd say 2 of my best wins, like in terms of achievements, I think from how it looked at the beginning of the game last year, were in that scenario, because I was at a sort of disadvantage. I'm trying to think of like a scenario I don't like playing. Seize the prize I don't like.
I don't think anyone does, mate. It's not a very good scenario.
Because, you're very rarely going to be able to get there before your opponent. So you're relying a bit on them not picking it up first turn, or if they've got a flying model or something like that. It becomes a bit too much of a first turn roll off. Whereas if they don't pick up first turn the snipers, then fine, and you can play it out normally. But it can be one of those ones which, through no fault of your own, it can get away from you.
I played against. I had my Corsairs against the Eagles last year at Seas, and even though I marched and I left my crossbows where I could shoot the eagle that picked it up first turn inevitably, and then second turn or third turn it was off the board, and I was like, oh well, good game, nothing I could do about that. So I feel your pain on that one.
And on a similar vein, probably heirlooms, because you don't have the maneuverability. If someone accidentally rolls a 6 in a random place on the board, it then can just mean that you've got a lot of turns of just slogging across, which is it's fine in a sort of untimed game, but in tournament situation, it can screw you over a little bit.
I have to. I'm probably not as patient and as persistent as you. I had to just ally in cavalry, so
yeah.
I have Suladan and some Serpent Riders or Harrigan Raiders, whichever points values preferable. So
yeah. I'm trying to think. Like, I haven't really gotten massively screwed over by heirlooms recently, so I probably will do soon now. But it's
you've put it out there, mate.
So
you put it out there now. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those ones though. Like, the scenario itself, you can plan and play pretty well as dwarves, but it sometimes just does come down to, and it can mess up your opponent's plans as well as much as yours. As one of you rolls a 6 on an objective that you were just trying to burn, and then it's like, oh god.
Yeah, when you've moved off and you've got 3 models on your back ones, and you're like, yeah, I'll just try for this one, and you get it, and you have to bring your whole army back. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that one. Most of them I'm fine with. What scenarios do you reckon you wouldn't like using dwarves?
Not having ever really played I played Iron Hills for a little while, but I got bored. Probably the ones that you actually like, probably just because I wouldn't be as familiar with how to play them as you are. I quite liked Lords of Battle. I quite liked To the Death. Again, Contest with Dane was fine. With the original 12, when I played dwarfs, there's probably only, because even the Maelstrom scenarios, you get +1 with the Iron Hills. I have just been given a Khazad-dûm / Warrior army. I think this has probably inspired me to maybe go and paint up my Balin and my Dwarf King and have a little go myself. But I mean, obviously now I've got the Ali King School of Dwarfs, I'm fine,
That's if everything I've said's been true. I could have just been.
Yeah, you could have just been lying to everyone, and you can tell me later when we're not recording. It's fine.
The table.
I've got 2 more questions, mate. I'll try and wrap this up because we're quite far into the time parameters that I said. Sam Huddy has asked, has Ali ever been in a situation in SBG or real life where tossing a dwarf was the most logical and beneficial way forward? And we won't tell the elves. I think he's referring to Gimli and Helm's Deep. But
I would say on many a night out, the short people of the GHL community may have been getting the Gimli treatment, right? In a completely PG way, I should add.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. That's fine, actually. We're podcasts not for children. It's fine. Matt King, your brother actually asked, this last question, so you can spend a bit of time on this one. Your brother asks, when creating a new army, do you consider synergy within the models in the army first, or what you need within the army to overcome certain challenges posed by the scenarios out there? Very good question, actually.
Yeah, weird for my brother. But
wow, shade.
So usually when I'm making an army, it starts with because I have an idea which I think is cool.
Okay.
So for example, this year it was, I like Vault Wardens. Vault Wardens are cool. Let's see if I can make a competitive army with them. So often the armies maybe start as a little bit silly. So the Vault Warden army kind of half started because when I was thinking of 1250 points list for Will's event in Ripon, I was like, it'd be hilarious if I took like 30 Vault Warden teams because I can. In the end, money meant that I couldn't. But it sort of starts with a like stupid extreme idea, and then like I get it down and then to pen and paper or however I'm writing my army list out and sort of put it on paper, and then I sort of look at the list and then I'll be there going, that seems a bit like, I mean, it's funny, but it probably wouldn't win. And then I sort of start cutting it down and sort of chopping and changing things around and stuff like that. So often it won't even be, I won't be setting a points total. It'll be like, I think using 10 Vault Wardens is cool.
Yeah.
And then I'll build an army around having 10 Vault Wardens, which may come out at 783 points, just randomly.
Right.
And then I'll look at events that are coming up, and I'll go, oh, there's a 700 one or there's an 800 one or something like that. And then I'll adapt that list to fit that points value.
Okay.
See if it still works and I can still get what I want. Because I generally think nearly everything in the game has some sort of value on the tabletop or an optimum way of using it. You just need to work out the list that can enable it, which you can do at some points, you can do at not other points. But if you start off with the idea of what the list you want the list to have in it, and you know what you think that thing can do, then just ignore the points limits and just build that army in your head, and then see when you get the balance right, and then you can work out the points level that you can possibly take it at. So that's kind of how my ideas of armies start. Often it's just sort of like I kind of find something that I think is cool, or I haven't seen. Often it'd be something that I haven't seen on the tabletop, because I quite like to be a sort of anti-meta player often, because I see it as a challenge. Like anyone can really take the biggest, cheesiest, filthiest list going, and do fairly well with it. And it's when, I don't know, if you go to an event with the ultimate cheese, and you don't win, or you don't even podium, you don't win 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6 games, it almost feels like a failure more. Whereas if you take a cool different list, you could get only 3 or 4 wins with it, but it feels like a bit more of an achievement, and so they're almost enjoyable.
Is that when I played Gondor for a year and gradually saw my overall positionings improve, and it does feel like you've achieved more playing a list that really isn't any way, shape or form meta, and achieving more with it. Obviously I never a podium with it. I think the highest I came was 7th, but even then that felt, because I was just using a Gondor army that no one was really playing at the time, it felt like I'd achieved a lot more than had I taken what everyone was taking at the time, which was some sort of caster with whatever it was. So I completely agree with you on that one.
And actually on that, that's exactly what I did with Army of 4 last year, because no one had been taking it at that point. Graham Hammers had finally gone up to Defence 7, and then if you look at my results across the year, like on the GBHR, I didn't podium for the first, so I did about 8 events I think last year. For the first 3 or 4 I didn't podium, and then in the last 4 events I think I podiumed in pretty much all of them, and it kind of was quite satisfying just to see the progress that, even though I would say I was already an accomplished dwarf player and player generally, at the beginning of the year, just how getting used to and learning the army played out across the year, and it's quite cool to use it across the whole year just to see that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
good question from Matt there.
I was going to say
oh.
I've got a little bit more. Probably I can expand that. So I come up with weird, crazy ideas, build a list to them, and then often I would then consider what the meta is at the time.
Okay.
So, for example, there's a lot of terror meta going around last year and still early into this year from Kurdan or Black Numenorians and the Army of the Dead and the like. So
I agree.
So I would sort of look at that list. So go. So looking at Vault Wardens actually, or Dwarfs generally, there's a lot of Army of the Dead going around. Army of the Dead are not pretty for Vault Wardens or Dwarves, especially once you've got Harbinger of Evil in there with the King of the Dead.
Yeah.
It means they're wounded in fours, which essentially means I go, I need a Warhorn, because then I'll go up to Courage 5, so at least they're still going to be wounding me on 5s, and I can charge them. And then it's kind of little things like that. So it's sort of idea first, how to counter the meta / what tournament am I going to, because some tournaments will let you know the scenarios and that. So it's sort of, I then basically enhance the list to what I need it to be able to face.
I think what I've learned from this is that I need to tell you what events I'm going to and what army ideas I have, and you can sort my list out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I always actually say though, I think because I normally say people who use armies they like will do better than using a competitive army they don't like.
I have to say I've been playing Corsairs since last June, I think. Strider Cup was when I first used them. And we actually won that, so that was quite nice. But I've loved using them, and they're not obviously overly popular. I think they've seen a little bit more popularity since Jay used them at the GT. Maybe not now, because that was like 2 years ago. But I've certainly enjoyed using a completely different army to what I would normally play. I'm predominantly a Gondor / Mordor player. I know they're another evil faction, but I certainly have enjoyed using, although they are defense 3 or 4, which is a bit squishy. But I have enjoyed using them, and some of the little Dalamir is actually pretty good in combat with the 3 attacks, and he rerolls all of his wounds, and he still gets the +1 if you trap stuff. So it's definitely, I definitely agree. Like using a less conventional army and really learning how to play it can definitely be more fun than just chasing the meta almost.
And also you can catch people out pretty regularly with armies like that. They go, people probably don't know half the time that when you outnumber with your Corsairs and stuff like that, you get the +1 to wound and things like that. Or Dalamir's smoke bombs can catch people out.
The smoke bombs are great, especially charging monsters with no will. It's like, you do outfight me. Have a smoke bomb in the face. Now I outfight you and I kill you. This is great. But I think that's it, mate. Have you got anything else you'd like to add, or?
No, I think I've spoken for probably the best part of 2 hours about dwarves. I was
going to say, you've done very well there. We've been in a Skype call for over 2 hours, and we've been recording for nearly 2 hours. So I haven't even done any plugging. I've done no plugging this episode. If you've got this far, guys, please leave a like on the episode. If everyone could write thank you, Ali, in the comments for coming on and being our first sort of meta GBHL player. I'm going to ask a few more people that I know somewhat well to come on and give some insight into some of their army lists. So if there's anyone you'd like to come on, put them in the comments as well, and I can ask them. They might say yes, they might say no, but I can ask them. I don't see, especially given the current situation in the world, they're probably more inclined to say yes because people do have a little bit more free time at the moment. But yeah, thank you, Ali, for coming on. I really do appreciate it, and I think you've done a really good job of, especially giving me more insight into maybe not even just with dwarfs, but generally looking at because I haven't played massively competitively for a long time now. It's just but it's definitely given me an insight into just how to play the game a little bit better in general. So thank you very much. Comment, like, share, subscribe. This will, if you're hearing this, it's probably going to be in line with a dwarf lore episode. We're going to try and do like a themed week. I don't know which order they're going to come out in, but you'll have them both in the same week anyway. I'm going to stop rambling because I always do this at the end. Thank you very much for listening, guys, and we'll catch you all later.
Cheers.